Yeah, good afternoon to one and all. We have come to the last session of the day 2 Atal sponsored FDP on Green Technology for Sustainable Life, Indian Perspective. So now we have Dr. Rohit Bakar sir from MNIT Jaipur to deliver a lecture on challenges in RE integration for system operation. So, a brief bio about sir. Dr. Rohit Bakar sir is an associate professor in Department of Electrical Engineering and Center for Energy and Environment. He researches on multiple aspects of power system operation and planning, ranging from network pricing, electricity markets, risk management, system flexibility, frequency regulation, wind forecasting, smart grid pricing, energy storage planning, and low carbon policy. He has held multiple research grants from HEO Horizon 2020 Consortium on Energy Market Design, Indian research agencies for the development of transmission and distribution network pricing, UK Industry on frequency response regulation, and from India UK Consortium on smart energy grids, energy storage technologies, and long-term system planning. He is the lead behind India's first of its kind MTech program on power system management. So it's a great privilege for us to have you over here with us to share. Sir, it is over to you, sir, for sharing your experiences in this area. Good. Once again, welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Sapna ma'am, and thank you, NIT Silchar, for inviting me for this talk. In fact, it is a pleasure talking to a good set of audience who can understand and appreciate the research that we do. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible. It's clear, sir, now.
Yeah. So we have been interacting with a vast set of researchers over all these years, researching upon a wide segment of challenges that the power system as such is facing, both from the operation perspective and from the planning perspective. One thing I would like to stress, and that I will be discussing during this presentation as well, is that we are keen to focus upon what are the real challenges that the industry is facing and how our research can help them to mitigate those challenges. This is what the focus has been of my research and of my group. We started with a program on power system management, which strongly focuses upon electricity markets, power system economics, and takes a wider view of what all things that we need to study in terms of regulation, in terms of pricing, and in terms of system operation. After the invitation that I got from NIT Silchar, what I thought was I'll be discussing upon, I won't go into the depth of any specific subject or topic, because then it would become significantly research oriented, which I thought may not be appreciated by a wider audience, which is coming from a different, which have got different perspectives of their own research. So what I will be focusing upon today is small snippets on what all research we are doing at our place and how is it relevant to the industry challenges that we are facing as of now. So it's generic talk, but we will be touching upon a few things one by one. And though all of them are not strongly related, but they all are challenges for our integration of this country. So start with just to give you a brief overview, we'll be studying what the Indian power sector is, what the key legislation and policy are in the sector as of now, how the industry is evolving, legislative perspective, policy perspective. What is this capacity mix as of now, where from generation perspective where do we stand, the targets, And specifically, we'll be focusing upon what are the challenges in RE growth and what is the impact of RE integration. So the whole talk would be about the grid, would be about integrating renewables in the grid, would be about what challenges people are facing, what challenges the system operator is facing, what challenges the system planners are facing. When we say about system operator, we mean the company named Power System Operation Corporation, POSOCO, which is an offshoot of Power Grid. And when we talk about planning, we talk about Central Electricity Authority and the team. We focus upon where all the investment should be done, what type of policy we need to frame for the country. So from both their perspective, this research would, this presentation would focus upon how these RE integration issues are creating problems and what challenges to handle in the near future. And just switch off now for the sake of and to focus on this presentation. Yeah. So to start with, we all understand, you would have heard about it. India is one of the fastest, it is one of the fastest growing economies. It is got one of the largest power grid. In fact, it is got the largest interconnected power grid, one of the largest integrated power grids in the world. And it is increasing. India is also trying to interconnect with the neighboring countries, which we already had interconnections with Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. Myanmar, we are building up. Sri Lanka, we are building up. And we are trying to also create what we call as one sun, one world, one grid. That would be integrating with other neighboring countries and all those countries which lie on the equatorial, closer to the equatorial axis, so that we can benefit from the energy that is generated from solar PV farms, which can help us to mitigate carbon emissions, which can help us to provide reliability and handle that intermittency that is coming from. So we already have a good set of electricity consumption. The level of electricity consumption as of now is somewhere around 1200 kilowatt hour. However, we are at a very low level as we compare ourselves with the developed countries. The electricity consumption is as high as 10 times of what we are consuming per capita. 10 times of what we are consuming as of now. The benefit of India, why there is a lot of focus upon India is it is strategically positioned. It is well connected by sea. It is closer to the equator, which gets a lot of solar generation. A lot of wind generation is available on the land as well on the seaside. You can put a lot of those wind turbines. So we have not explored that potential as of now. Being a fast-growing economy, our energy consumption is increasing, and it is one of the fastest growing economies in terms of energy consumption. And we are making a big shift that we all understand. Though we all make a hue and cry about the oil prices, but one of the added benefits that we see is that would be a push for renewable, push for integrating more of renewables in terms of electric vehicles, which is likely to see a big jump over the next decade or so. So we are a changing economy, and that is why a lot of investment is happening, and that will continue to happen over next decade or so. Because of our targets, because of our commitment to the environment, every country has set itself few targets of renewable generation, of mitigating carbon emissions. Those which are commonly known as the intended nationally determined contributions, INDC targets. And for ourselves, we have committed to 40% of our electricity generation coming from non-fossil fuel sources by 2030. So that is whatever electricity we will be producing, the energy that we will be producing, 40% of it will be coming from non-fossil fuel sources by the year 2030. It is a big target, and we are significantly progressing on it in a very big way. Add on to that, we also have a target of 175 gigawatt of renewable based generation by 2022. We are pushing it like anything, especially in the case of solar farms, solar generation. It is making a big leap, and we hope to be there. We may even exceed that target. And we also need robust organization. We need not only good set of planners, good set of system operators, a very strong grid, which is Power Grid Corporation of India Limited, a good set of distribution network, which definitely is an area where a lot of there is scope for improvement, and the potential to capture whatever renewables are there. So for those, we have got specialized agencies. We were one of the first countries which had got a Ministry of New and Renewable Energy Sources several decades ago. There was a lot of focus on that, and that is one of the reasons that we are going ahead in renewable generation in a significant way. As far as the industry structure is concerned, we have this structure that most of us can relate to. We, as an Indian power sector, we have got the different functions of electricity generation that we see, starting from the policy function. Usually the policy making is done by the central government through the Ministry of Power. So the policies, broad policy guidelines, what would be the regulation, what would be the policy, those things are typically being taken care of by the central government. Even the planning part is done by the Central Electricity Authority, which reports to the Ministry of Power. So these two are the agencies which are handling the policy and planning of the power sector. At the state level, wherever specific interventions are required, the government in itself, the state governments in themselves, they are doing it. They don't have specific agencies. Regulation, which basically relates to regulating the sector, typically regulating what would be the tariff, what are the permissions required to put up the power plants, the transmission lines. Those things are typically being taken care of by the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, CERC at the central level, and in the states, it is done by the State Electricity Regulatory Commissions, both being supported by the Central Advisory Council and the State Advisory Council at their respective levels. As far as generation is concerned, generation is typically, in the Indian case, you see the National Thermal Power Corporation, NTPC, National Hydropower Corporation, NHPC, NPCL, the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. These are the big entities. Apart from that, we have got BBNB, Damodar Valley Corporation, and other. NIPCO is there. NIPCO is another big entity that is there, which is especially focusing upon the northeast sector, where the hydropower potential is significant. So NIPCO is another big company which is doing generation. Apart from these central generating stations, we have got the mega power plants, UMPPs, which have been installed by the central government. These are also operational at the central level. And at the state level, we have got the generation companies. Each state has got its own generation company, which was earlier a part of the state electricity boards. Now, once they have been separated out, the generation companies, in each state, you'll see one or two or even more generation companies coexisting together. Apart from that, independent power producers or the private generators like Jindal, like Videocon, like JP, like Tata Power, like PSES, Torrent, and there are so many other players who are doing private power generation. They are also a part of the generation portfolio. In the transmission sector, we have got the central transmission utility, which is the power grid, which we call as the transmission licensee, which has got a license to transfer the power from the generators to the distribution companies. Apart from that, we have got the state transmission utilities, which are reporting to the state governments or the state regulatory commissions. In each state, you'll find a transmission company which transfers the power from the state generating stations to the distribution companies within the state, or maybe from the central generating stations, the power that is coming from the central generating stations to the distribution companies in the state. So these state transmission utilities are basically taking care of the transmission of power in the respective states. These are the transmission licenses at the state level. Apart from that, we have got the system operators. The overall company at the national level is called POSOCO, under which we have got the National Load Dispatch Center and the Regional Load Dispatch Centers, the National Load Dispatch Center at Delhi, and 5 regional load dispatch centers in different parts of the country, reflecting the earlier north, east, western, and southern, and the northeast grid. So for each of these grids, we have got a regional load dispatch center. There are state load dispatch centers at each state. So if you talk about a state like Rajasthan, there is a state load dispatch center which takes care of the whole of Rajasthan, and another load dispatch center which takes care of the nearby states as well. So these are the system operators which handle basically the real-time balancing of generation and demand in the grid. At the local level, at the distribution company level, it is the state load dispatch centers, and at the national level, we have got the regional load dispatch centers and the national dispatch centers. As far as the distribution function is concerned, that is being handled by the distribution licenses at the state level. Those distribution licenses we all are well aware of. Distribution companies, typically they are government owned. As of now, most of the states they have got government owned companies. Though some of the states they have started privatizing those. The recent example being that of Odisha, which has privatized its distribution companies. Odisha, incidentally, was one of the states which was the first one in 1986, which started with the reform agenda, and it did the bifurcation of the generation, transmission, and distribution companies. Still, it is evolving. Now they have privatized the distribution companies, and more changes are likely. Apart from these entities which have got physical assets, transmission company has got physical assets, the load dispatch centers, they have got physical assets, they have got the control rooms, the distribution companies, they have got the physical assets in terms of the distribution framework, the distribution network. The generation companies, they have got the physical assets at the ground level. So apart from that, there are entities which do electricity trading as well, which trade electricity, which buy power from some places and sell it to other places. These trading licenses could be operating at the central level or could be operating at the state level. At the central level, also the license is being provided by the Central Regulatory Commission. At the state level, by the State Electricity Commission. So these entities, these typically buy power from the generator, sell it to the distribution companies over the network of the transmission companies. This is presently what is happening. As far as regulation or control over the sector is concerned, pricing and other things, as I discussed, the regulatory commissions take care of those parts. However, if there are still any issues with the decisions of the regulatory commissions, there is an entity what we call as an appellate tribunal, wherein you can petition in case if you are not satisfied with the regulations, if you are not satisfied with the rules or tariff being framed by the respective regulatory commissions. So that opportunity is also there. And in case you are still not satisfied, you can still go to the higher. So this is the broad industry structure that stands as of now in the case of this country. As whatever is evolving as of now, it is evolving since 1989. We had the Electricity Act in 2003. There was a major change in the industry structure, which was pushed forward by the Electricity Act of 2003. Apart from that, we have had a National Action Plan for Climate Change, which gave the broad policy guidelines. We have the National Electricity Policy, framed in 2005, the tariff which has subsequently been revised, National Tariff Policy framed in 2006, which has subsequently revised. In fact, the National Electricity Policy is in the draft stage, and we'll have a final policy coming up very shortly. We had the Rural Electrification Policy, which had a significant thrust on providing the last mile connectivity to the rural farmers. According to this policy, a lot of investment happened in the rural areas. And that is how we have recently reached the target of electrification of all the villages, which our Prime Minister had announced a couple of years ago. Apart from that, we are on the verge of changing the industry in a significant way by the Electricity Amendment Bill 2020, which is there in the Parliament as of now, which emphasizes that the distribution business would be separated into two parts. One is the network business that is providing the network, which one of the entities, the distribution company, will continue to do. But apart from that, there would be another entity, which we call as the retailer. That would also come into picture, which would not own any physical asset, but it would only buy power from the generation company, get it transferred over the transmission company, get it transferred over the distribution company, and the consumers would have a choice to buy electricity from retailer A, B, C, or D. The same way as we can get new connections for mobiles via one service provider, second, third, or fourth. In the same way, this Act has provisions for the consumers that they can buy power from any of the retailers that is providing electricity for them. This is a very successful business case, and other countries like UK have already adopted it. Other countries have also, other developed markets, they also have adopted it. And if this becomes successful, it is quite likely to bring in competition at the retail side. That is, the benefit of the competition would be availed by the consumer. As of now, we do not have a choice from where we can buy electricity. But if this Act comes into being, then as customers, you and me would have a choice from whom to buy power. And definitely we'll be buying power from the supplier, from the retailer who is providing electricity at the cheapest possible rate to us. So this is a broad scenario that has evolved over the last 15, 20 years. And we are making significant evolution in this sector in terms of a lot of regulations are coming up, ancillary service regulation, this new Act, new electricity policy, and so on. So things are changing at a very fast pace. A lot of investment has happened because of this. Now you see a lot of growth in the power sector, a lot of new power plants have come up. We are not in a situation where our generation is not able to meet the peak demand for the last 4-5 years, but last 4 years. We are in a situation wherein whatever is the system peak demand, the country's peak demand, the generation is sufficient enough to fulfill that peak demand. So that provides us with the generation sufficiency to fulfill electricity demand, and we do not have to go in for load shedding at any point of time because of generation inadequacy. So these are the benefits that we are able to derive by way of restructuring of this power sector. And this has helped bring in more investment, more private investment, more competition between those players, and providing economies, both not only on the generation side, but for the consumer as well. So with this, to see where do we stand as of now. This is the generation mix that we have from the last year's data. You can see that half of the generation is still coming from coal-fired power. And a significant portion is coming from the renewables, then gas, large hydro, and then small power coming from the lignite and some small even in the RE portfolio. There is a significant generation coming from wind and solar, which are the lead, where the technology is the cheapest, and the installation has grown significantly. These are the two major sources of RE power. Apart from that, small biopower, 2.8%, and small hydro also is there in the picture. So this is the general portfolio of generation that exists as of now. The total installed capacity, that is this is last year's data, that is the fossil fuel generation is somewhere around 61%, 62%, and the non-fossil fuel generation. So this is the general capacity mix that we have as of now, and this is shifting towards more and more renewables over a period of time. It is significantly shifting. The targets that we have, the government has set for itself by 2022 up a target of 100 gigawatt of solar, 60 gigawatt of wind, 10 gigawatt of biomass, and apart from that, a lot of small hydro sources we also set it to the target. With that, the total renewable energy generation in the country, percentage-wise, it is take care that this is the energy generation. This is not the installed capacity. Installed capacities for renewables is usually higher than the share of the energy that they can provide. That is because these renewable sources, they are intermittent and they do not provide power at all points of time. Because they are intermittent, they are despite that they have got good capacities, the level of electricity generation or the energy that they can provide, that is significantly lower as compared to the capacity. So when we talk about capacity, it may be somewhere around 40%, the RE capacity. But when we talk about the energy that they are supplying, that is relatively low, somewhere around 21%. That is typically because of their highly intermittent and variable nature, which does not provide consistent level of energy generation from these products. And this also, hydro, large and small, they constitute somewhere around 12% of generation. Solar, wind, and biopower, they constitute about 9% of generation. This is the RE mix portfolio. Focusing upon the topic of this presentation, that is, what are the challenges with this RE generation? What are the problems that we are facing from the system operator and system planner's perspective? This is what typically I would like to focus upon today. We all understand there are significant targets and government is pushing forward like anything to fulfill those targets. What are the problems? The first problem is the high cost of putting up those projects. High cost solar panels, high cost of wind turbines, that is one of the big issue. However, we all understand over the last 5 to 7 years, the cost of solar generation has drastically reduced, which has helped us to put in more and more solar, which has helped us to fulfill our solar generation targets and bring the cost of generation from solar, the per unit cost of generation, not the running cost, but the overall cost of generation from solar. The running cost is obviously negligible in case of solar and wind, but since the installation cost is high and if they have got specified lifetime, the solar panels need to replace them after a certain point of time. They do not have a lifetime of 40 years or 50 years as is typically in the case of coal power plants. They have smaller lifetimes, 20, 25 years is maximum that the solar farms can be operated, after which their panels have to be replaced because of low efficiency and integration. So considering those, still the cost of generation is coming to be somewhere around 2 rupees 40 paisa for solar generation, and for wind generation is coming somewhere around 3 rupees per unit. Though it is becoming more and more comparable with the cost of electricity generation from coal-based power plants, which is also somewhere around 2 rupees per unit. Maybe somewhere at 1.8 rupees, somewhere it's 2.2. So it does match the average cost of power generation from the fossil fuel power plants, the gas of the coal power plants. Gas is slightly costly. Gas generation is slightly costly because of the higher cost of gas involved. And that is one of the reasons why in this country we have got a lot of these gas power plants, but we are not operating those because we have made that investment when the gas was cheap. Nowadays, when the cost of gas in the international markets have gone up, these power plants are not being operated. They are being operated at very few time when you really require the peaking generation in the system. Otherwise, most of these power plants, they are running at a very low very low generating factor, the utilization factor of power plants. So that now we are focusing upon the renewables. They have got very high investment cost. The present infrastructure in terms of transmission networks, that is inadequate. you talk about any of the states in this country where there is significant penetration of renewables, you talk about Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Rajasthan, all these three states are facing challenges in evacuating that power when the peak generation is there happening in these portions of this part of the country. So whenever there's a lot of wind power generation in Tamil Nadu or Gujarat or significant power generation happening in the western part of Rajasthan, one of the biggest constraints that these the local distribution companies, the local load dispatch centers face is that the network does not have enough capacity to transfer that power from the generating power plants to the load side. Usually the load side is not very close to the generation side. So the power has to be transferred from the generation to the customers over the network. And that is where a lot of investment in infrastructure is needed. Another big challenge is that the RE sources, they are intermittent. We all understand the solar comes up in the morning, goes back in the evening, so it is intermittent. It is not a stable source of energy supply. During the evening hours, it ramps down at a very fast pace. In the morning hours, it ramps up at a fast pace. And at any point of time, if there is cloud cover, that suddenly leads to a loss of generation. So depending upon what is the weather condition, generation from the solar panel, and what is the time of the day, the generation from the solar panel, that would vary. Same is the case for wind power generation. Wind power generation is wind blowing in the atmosphere. That in itself keeps on varying, leading to a significant variability, and intermittency of the power generated from the wind turbines. This leads to unreliability in the which further requires better monitoring and control of the grid operating system. When we say better monitoring and control means we need to make a lot of investment into the smart grid infrastructure, which can monitor the generation, which can monitor the load at a more at a higher frequency intervals, and more precise measurement of the operating conditions, the generation and the load of the system. So that requires a lot of investment. A lot of investment in the communication infrastructure, control infrastructure, monitoring infrastructure. So when we see from a technical perspective, what are the challenges that this variable renewable energy generation creates? From a technical perspective, from a research perspective, what are the key problems that the system operator is facing? When we think about those, you can see from this figure on the right hand side that because these renewable generators, wind and solar, they are non-synchronous generators. They are not synchronized with the grid. They are not coupled to the grid with the rest of the generators. So one of the big challenges is that they do not help to maintain the frequency and voltage response in the system. Had these generators if they had any revolving part, if they had any of them would have an inertia. The solar power plants definitely, because they generate from the solar panels. They have got inverters which convert from DC to AC. They do not have any revolving part, because of which they do not have any inertia, because of which they cannot provide any frequency response to the system. Because they do not have any inertia, they do not rotate. Their capability to provide frequency management support to the grid is almost zero. Same is the case for wind power plants. Wind power plants, though they have got rotating turbines, but these rotating turbines are not coupled with the main grid. They are isolated from the main grid, which does not provide them the capability to provide, which does not provide them the capacity to frequency response to the. This is one of the problems that industry, the system operators are facing right now. And this problem is likely to aggravate. For sure, it will aggravate. As we bring in more and more renewables, the system frequency responses will go down, frequency exertions will increase. So the system operators, as at present, it is currently worried, and it is looking forward to solutions how it can allow more renewable integration, because they are the people who have to handle the real-time generation. Now, they are really worried about how to handle this balancing of generation and demand at each point of time, wherein most of the generation now coming up is in the renewables. That requires, from a planning perspective, that requires a lot of technical studies, technical network studies, which possibly one or more of the topics that we're studying today will be focusing upon. Another problem with this variable renewable generation is that they are location constrained and they are distributed. When we say they are location constrained, that means you cannot put up a solar power plant at any place. You need to have good irradiance at that point. For wind also, you need to have high wind velocities, which is not available at all places in the country. So there are specific locations where you can put up those solar farms or wind farms, which limits their capability to provide reliable electricity supply. Had it been that you could put up those power plants at any place in the country, you would have definitely put them closer to the demand. However, that requires a lot of space, a lot of land, which is not easily available on the load side. So if you're talking about Delhi, if you're talking about industrialized cities like Mumbai and Calcutta and Chennai, the land cost is too high. So usually these renewable power plants, they are being put up at areas which are far off from the cities, which are not so well connected with them. So these location constraints lead to making more investment into the grid, so that wherever these power plants are installed, they are connected to the grid adequately, and that location constraint does not hinder the grid. Another challenge with this is that they are distributed in nature. The problem that comes up with their distributed nature is that had it been a single power plant, a large power, maybe 1,000 megawatt, 2,000 megawatt, 5,000 megawatt, the investment that you could make to control the power generation would have benefited you. However, since the generation now is more and more distributed, farms are distributed in areas which are far off, and the generator in itself, the generation that is coming from those power plants, it is not controlled by injection of any fuel. It is controlled simply by the weather condition. So whatever generation is coming up, it is distributed, it is non-controllable. You do not have the capacity or the capability of the investment of the communication infrastructure to control the power generation coming out from these power plants, from wind power plants, the solar power plants. That creates a problem, because now whatever these power plants are producing, and as per the law of the land, as per the regulation, current regulation, whatever generation is being done by the renewables has to be allowed by the system operator. Whatever be the intermittency, the system operator has to allow that generation to be injected into the grid. So when you allow that intermittent generation to be injected into the grid, that eventually leads to a situation in which the conventional power plants have to reduce their generation so that there is appropriate generation and demand balance. So you cannot, the conventional power plants, the fossil fuel power plants, cannot continue to generate at their peak level when there is high solar generation. So usually these conventional power plants have to back out, or they have to reduce their generation. They have to reduce their generation so that whatever generation is coming out from the renewables, that can be allowed to integrate the system. However, it is not always feasible to allow the generation because of constraints. So a lot of renewable curtailment also has to be done. But despite the renewable generation available, because the network is not able to handle that, because the demand is not appropriately able to align itself with the generation, many a times this renewable generation has to be curtailed because of some or the other technical reason. These reasons, a lot of these reasons, and some of them fall into the domain of voltage control, transmission capacities, and these are some of the issues which are significantly pricking the system operator. These, from a planning perspective, require a lot of geospatial planning and technical method studies. When we say geospatial planning, we mean locational planning, that where all generations are available, where all the demand is available, and how does it change with time. When is it available during the hour of the day? Which season is the power maximum available? In which season the power is not available? All those things go into the geospatial planning and technical method studies for these renewable power integrated grids. Another big challenge that comes up is the uncertainty of this generation. It is simply uncertain. You never know how much generation from the grid. Suddenly, because of wind blowing, high wind blowing, a lot of wind generation, when you possibly do not have that demand to allow that generation to do it. So many times in Rajasthan, we hear that in night time when the wind starts blowing, a lot of wind generation, the wind generators, they pick up generation at that point of time. But despite that, they want to inject power into the grid. The demand is not there. Despite the generation available, the demand is not there at times, which leads to a situation where the renewable generators have to go in for RE curtailment, the renewable energy curtailment is to be resorted to. This is a general problem regarding the flexibility, that the system does not have adequate level of flexibility to handle the uncertainty. Flexibility means, does it have the scope? Does it have the provision to handle that uncertainty? Suddenly, if significant wind power generation goes off and the solar power generation is not available, does the system have additional capacity to handle those intermittencies? Those are challenges from the system operator's perspective as well as from a planner's perspective, because if you are not able to handle it during the day, then whatever is happening over the year's time period, that gets inputted in the planning studies, and that is how the impact of the renewables on planning can be judged. These usually are done with the help of the SPAS simulations, the studies that we study with final year power system people. Those type of studies are being done to assess the uncertainty, uncertainty inherent in the system and flexibility that is required in system operation. Another co-terminus issue is that of variability. That is, the renewables are not only uncertain, but they are variable. They could be variable and uncertain, or they could be uncertain but not variable. So either of those combinations can exist. So when we say that it is uncertain, that is, we cannot predict what would be the pattern. So when we talk about solar generation, it is not so uncertain. But when we talk about its, we understand that the solar generation will come up in the morning, go down in the evening. Whereas in the case of wind, we never know when the winds would start blowing. We can only use the weather forecasters forecast data, and from that we try to presume what will be the quantum of wind generation that would happen. So uncertainty, apart from the uncertainty part, variability also is a big issue. And both these issues of uncertainty, that is non-predictability, and variability means significant variations happening over a small period of time. Both these issues require that the grid should have significant level of flexibility inherently available in the system, or may be provided by other sources in the system. So this term flexibility, the system property, that is steady flexibility, that falls under the domain of uncertainty mitigation techniques, under the domain of variability mitigation technique, and this is becoming a big issue nowadays. System operators, that they will handle the uncertainty arising. Both these issues of uncertainty and variability. One of the ways by which you can handle this is flexibility, or by way of making more investment on the generation side. So whenever there is a shortfall of generation, sudden shortfall of generation from the wind power plants, the solar power plants can automatically bring in their automatically they can bring in their resources and help handle the variability of the system. This can help to provide firm capacity, that is firming above the capacity of the generators, which otherwise the wind power plants themselves may not be able to do it. These type of studies are usually handled under the domain. Nowadays, they are significantly being focused upon. And these are the studies that many of us could have studied with our MTech courses, the generation expansion planning. So there we try to consider what is the variability of the system and what is the level of flexibility required, what is the firm generation capacity required in the system. So you can see from the variable renewable energy properties, what are the system properties that are affected, and what are the planning studies that we need to make. From this, we move on to understand more intricacies and the overall picture of this presentation. We'll be talking about three broader issues. One is, how does it impact long-term system planning? How does it impact system operation? And what is the market evolution happening in this segment, which will be able to help mitigate these challenges of RE integration. From system operation, we have got three broad issues of inertia and PFR primary frequency response support, operational flexibility, as well as operating results. We'll be talking about these in detail as well. One of the first things that we need to understand where we are present. A lot of research over the last 7-8 years, which is relevant to what the Central Electricity Authority requires, the system planners require, the policymakers in NITI Aayog, they require that how is this, what is the future of RE generation in this country? When we are asked this question, many times people ask, many times you may have also come across this question, but what is the maximum level of renewable penetration that we can integrate into the grid? Everybody has got some vague answers, 20%, 30%, 40%, 60%. Some even talk about 100% RE. Is it feasible? Is it not feasible? So that is the point where research helps us to understand. And one of the key problems that needs to be investigated is that because of these intermittencies, because of these uncertainties of renewable generation, because of these short-term intermittencies of this renewable generation, what is the impact on long-term system planning because of these short-term intermittencies arising from the renewable generation? This is one of the key areas of research where these policymakers are interested in. I'll be touching upon what research we have done. How does it help to, this is just one point where I would like to focus upon. There are very wide applications of this research, which many of you can follow. But just to give you what is the basis of understanding these. So you can see from the two graphs, these are about the solar and wind capacity factor distribution in this country. It is, take care that this is not about the solar and wind potential in the country. That is not the case. This is about the capacity factor distribution in the country. That is that if you have got a solar power plant in any of these part of this country, the small cells that you see, these are the cells that we have studied over the last 4 years, in which we have bifurcated the country into 1 degree by 1 degree, that is 110 kilometers by 110 kilometers cells, and assessed the potential of each cell independently, not only the generation available, renewable generation available, but what is the demand in that cell, and tried to focus upon the small cell in itself, understanding what is the demand supply imbalance from each of these cells coming up into the system. While doing that study, we assessed what is the capacity factor of the generation. So if you see in some portions of the country, the capacity factor in Ladakh and Rajasthan and some parts of Gujarat, the capacity factor of solar power generators is very high. It is as high as 0.25, 0.23, 0.2, not 5 or 0.23, sorry, 0.23, that is the range, maximum range at which the annual capacity factor of solar is available. That means whatever is the capacity, for 25% of that capacity of solar generation can be realized. That is the level of capacity factor that these plants can, and that is a very good number. Most of the countries, they are operating in the range of 10%. And even in our country, you'll see there are large number of areas where only 10% of the capacity can be realized. So with this, we can understand that the value of putting up those solar power plants lies in these areas. But then we have to assess that if the value of putting up solar power plants in these areas in Rajasthan and Ladakh and Uttarakhand, these are the areas where these power plants have to be put up. Do we have the load? Do we have the network? Unfortunately, in most of these areas, we do not have adequate network. We do not have adequate load to utilize that generation. So in that case, what we need to do is, from a planner's perspective, we need to put up transmission lines so that the same power, the same excess power that is available in these cells can be transported to the load side, the load heads in the grid. So this is what fundamental research is required to assess the potential of each cell and the requirement for network infrastructure in a long-term perspective, system planners perspective. Same is the case for wind generation. You see that there are areas in Gujarat, Rajasthan, in the southern peninsula, especially the coastal side, in Karnataka, in Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, where there is significantly high capacity factor of wind. So we need to see which are those areas and which are the areas that, despite you may put up a wind turbine, since the capacity factor is low, since the wind is blowing only for a small period of time, the utilization of that wind generation would not be so great. So we need to focus upon those cells, those areas where the capacity factor of wind generation is high, which is denoted by the dark blue cells in this. From these fundamental studies, from these fundamental understanding of the Indian power sector, we came up with how it impacts. Just to give you one example, how it impacts once we go in for such in-depth study of the potential and the capacities. You see the two graphs in which the northern part of the country is being had. If we do not go into the cell distribution layer, the way in which we have been doing it, what we would typically come out with, the studies usually what they do is, they would color the whole of Uttar Pradesh in a single color, indicating it having a capacity of somewhere around annual average GHI, the irradiation, somewhere around 5.13. Whereas if you practically see the irradiance in Uttar Pradesh, you will see that there is a significant variation in the level of irradiance that can be observed in different cells of Uttar Pradesh. So I'll just highlight it for the ease of this. So if you see Uttar Pradesh, which is indicated by, this portion is indicated by a same color. So from a planner's perspective, it may reflect that all of Uttar Pradesh has got the same level of capacity factor. But that is not the case. In some portions, which are relatively darker, you see this portion, you see these portions, these are relatively dark portions. These have got higher potentials. And if you are putting up a power plant in these areas, let's say in this area does not have that potential. So we need to be aware of which are the areas where this renewable generation, the solar generation, would provide the maximum capacity. So we have to go in for minute understanding of the system, minute understanding of the grid, minute understanding of the geospatial features of that area. Same is the case for Rajasthan. It shows the whole of Rajasthan as dark red, having very high potential. But is that the case? No. All areas of Rajasthan, they do not have the same level of irradiance. Some of the areas which are closer to the UP border, Punjab border, you'll see that the potential is significantly low. And in that case, the economic value of those investments may not be easily recovered. So we go in for a very small resolution of 1 degree by 1 degree, and instead of going in for the state averages, this gives us an understanding of what is the potential in each area and what is the investment that would be required in terms of network infrastructure. And you can see from the graph at the bottom, both the graphs represent the same thing. However, one of them has got a time scale of 244 time slices. That is, it is measured 244 times in that period, and the other one has got only 12 time slices. So when you measure the values, the capacity factors, at only 12 time slices, that is once in a month over the whole year, if you're only evaluating the value once in a month, the results that you would get is like the graph that you see on the right hand side. So this may indicate that the capacity available in February may be low, and in April it is high, in July it is low, and in October it is very high. However, when we practically, rather than taking one time slice a month, if we go in for a larger resolution, larger temporal resolution of the generation, we would get a more clearer picture of which are the days in which the generation is available at a higher rate and when it is not available. So this is available from this graph, which has got larger time slices. You can say that why don't we go in for a continuous evaluation? No, we cannot go in for a continuous evaluation because the quantum of computational effort required is enormous. And the value that you can derive from that, the economic value that you can derive from so much of analysis is not worth the investment, both in terms of monetary as well as in terms of the time effort that's put in. But getting an insight of 244 time slices instead of 12 time slices does give us a good understanding of when this renewable generation is available, where it is available. Where it is available, we get it by the spatial resolution. When it is available, the time resolution, we get it from the temporal resolution. So lower spatial and temporal resolution of the planning models. Presently, what we are doing, we have got low resolution. We measure it for a state. We measure it once a month. No, that is not going to help for planning, because the level of intermittencies in this renewable is so high that if you measure it only once a month, you are bound to have a wrong measurement, which would lead to overestimation of RE uptake. Definitely, it will lead to an overestimation of what is the RE that is in the system. Overestimation of RE uptake and an underestimation of the required flexibility. And that it would not give us an appropriate understanding of what is the required flexibility in the grid. What is the required generation from other sources, coal power plants that is required in the grid to fulfill this intermittency arising from RE generation. These are the problems because of which we are not able to assess the capacity of the renewables appropriately. Right assessment of the potential is not happening, which is eventually leading to an overinvestment in the system, which is leading to investment which the money for the investment that you have made, which cannot be recovered. We are putting up those power plants, but we are not able to utilize those because the time at which that generation is available. Possibly when we were doing the planning, we were not able to understand that what is the spatial and temporal resolution of those power plants, and we are not able to derive the maximum generation of capacity from those power plants, from those generating systems. So considering that, there is a need to go in for more stronger spatial and temporal resolution of the generating capacities. These variable renewable plants, the variable renewable energy generation, they have to be integrated into the planning studies for the system, for the national planning mechanism, which you can see in this graph, in this figure. When we go in for long-term system planning, which takes input from hours, which takes input of the data from hours to seasons. Usually these planning models have got low details. They do not go into very fine details. They usually will take it again. What is the capacity of generation available? What is the peak generation capacity? They will take a figure, one figure for the whole year. Whereas that figure is not representative of what is the generation available all throughout the year. That figure keeps on changing. During some of the months, that generation is not available. During some of the months, it is significantly available. So that detailing is not available in long-term system energy planning models, which is required, which helps us to assess the impact of renewable generation, intermittent renewable generation for long-term system planning studies. These studies also include, as a sub-part of the long-term system planning model, we also study the generation and network capacities with the help of geospatial planning models. We take into consideration what is the network topology, consider what are the production cost model for different power plants, what is that function AI plus beta Pi plus gamma Pi square, that's cost model of generators. What will be the production cost model of those generators, which would have a resolution of minutes to hours. That is, for every minute you will get a different value of that generation cost. Then we also need to consider the static grid value. What is the network? What is the grid at any given point of time? That also needs to be considered. What are the capacities that are available in that grid? Apart from that, we also need to assess the grid using dynamic grid models, which give us the voltage and current profiles in the grid at any given point. All these things need to be considered for going in for a long-term system planning. And all these things are fed into this planning or have an assessment. The recent challenges, they are arising because of renewables. And because of the variable nature, we have to go in for a finer assessment in terms of time and space. We represent the firm capacity. We are, when we are able to assess them, we are able to assess them in terms of time and space. Our capacity to reflect that generation as a firm capacity, that improves. We can confidently say that, okay, at this point of time, at 3 to 4 o'clock today, this is the firm capacity that is available. Because now we are able to assess that, we are able to evaluate what will be the generation during 3 to 4 p.m. today. This helps in improving the firm capacity as well as the capacity value of the generation that is available in the system. Also, by knowing the variability, we can assess what is the flexibility requirement in the system. What would the flexibility, what are the flexibility constraints, which power plants can ramp up faster, which power plants cannot ramp up faster. So all those constraints can be considered for system operation and planning, which help us to understand that, okay, if one of the power plants is not able to ramp up to mitigate the fall in generation from solar generation, then what do we do? Which are the other power plants that we need to bring up to handle the sudden fall in generation from solar generation, from solar power plants, may be happening during the evening time. So that flexibility assessment can only be done if we are assessing the power system operation on a minute, on a finer time and spatial temporal resolution. These also help us to understand what are the transmission capacities required, what are the transmission corridors that we need to build upon. That understanding can help us to understand the production cost model, which power plants are producing at a cheaper rate, how far they are from the load side, how much would be the cost involved in generation, how much would be the cost involved in transferring that power. So all these understanding, they help us to do long-term system planning. This is how long-term system planning takes into consideration a larger data set and tries to build up a picture of what the system planning requires. What are the power plants that need to operate. So this was about the planning perspective, how we are doing it. What are the key innovations that we have done? So one of the key innovations that I discussed was going in for a finer or a very refined temporal and spatial resolution understanding of the generation from renewables. Another big challenge that is coming up because of renewables on the operation side is that of inertia and the time difference. The reason is simple. When you've got solar farms, when you've got wind farms, as I just discussed, they are not the solar farms, they are connected via inverters, electronic components. Same is the case for wind power plants. They are also connected by electronic circuitry. The generations on the turbine side is not directly, the turbine is not directly coupled with the grid. So because of that, whenever there is a disturbance in the grid, the turbine in itself is not able to provide that inertial support. What happens? What happens? This is one of the figures that reflects the challenge. In a normal steady state, you see that the frequency of the system is stable at F0. When the frequency of the system is stable at F0, suddenly, let's say at point A, there is a problem. The problem could be in terms of any generator or in transmission line. So the moment there is a problem in the system, there is an unexpected power supply failure. That leads to demand and supply imbalance, which, because of the demand supply imbalance, the system's frequency suddenly, because sufficient generation is not available, the system frequency suddenly falls from the nominal value to a very low value. Suddenly falls, and it reaches a value which we call as the frequency matters. It happens at a very fast pace, few seconds, or even 1 to 2 seconds. It happens in that time. So suddenly the generation is lost. The moment the generation is lost or the line is lost, the generation is not available. At that point of time, frequency will suddenly go down. Now, because even before any generator can respond, other generators can respond and ramp up their generation. Those generators may take time. If you want to ramp up the other generators, they may take time, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, maybe half an hour or so. It will take time. So what happens during that? During that period, the inherent inertia of the grid. When we say inherent inertia of the grid, we mean the inherent inertia of the turbine connected to the coal power. Inherent inertia of the turbine connected to the hydropower. Those are the turbines which are connected, which are coupled to the generator, and the generator in itself is coupled to the grid. So those turbines which are directly connected to the grid via the generators, since those turbines are rotating, at that point of time, they continue to rotate not only at the same speed, but at a higher speed. They tend to run at a higher speed because the demand has suddenly increased beyond what the generation is. Because of this is something like, I'll give you an analogy. This is something like you are driving a bike on a road at in its highest gear, let's say gear 4, and suddenly you press the clutch. So the moment you press the clutch, the the energy being supplied by the engine to the motorcycle, that is lost. The moment you press the clutch, no energy is supplied from the engine to the machine, to the motorbike. However, the motorbike still keeps on running. It keeps on running because of its own inertia. And many a times, because the clutch is not restricting or restraining the operation, many a times the bike can run at a much faster speed. You would feel that the bike is running freely because it does not have the control of the clutch. It is not coupled. The gear is not coupled to that. It runs freely. There is no restriction on that control speed. Similar situation happens for the turbine when the demand is there and suddenly one of the generators has been lost. The turbines, they get a free run. They tend to run at higher speeds so as to mitigate the power requirement in the grid. That is because they have got their inherent inertia to rotate. Because of the inherent inertia to rotate, these generators which are running, suddenly they start providing higher level of generation, which help this system to recover from the position of frequency nadir to a position where the frequency is slightly recovered, which we call as the settling. Relatively, it is a settled point C that you see. It has recovered from that position of frequency nadir. This primary frequency is the inertial response, and the primary frequency response usually happens only for a few seconds. That is, the motorbike, if you are pressing the clutch, it will not continue to run forever and ever. After a certain point of time, it will slow down. It will stop because there is no energy being supplied by the machine. It was only running because of its own inertia. And the inertia would be spent as the kinetic energy. The inertia is spent in the kinetic energy, and as the energy is lost, the inertia that the bike can provide would be lost. Same is the case for these generators. Their inertial support that they can provide, that gets lost in few seconds. However, that helps the system. In those few seconds or few minutes, you can give a signal to the rest of the generators. You can give a governor signal to ramp up their generation. So this time when from point A to point C, which may be from few minutes to several minutes, maybe from 1 minute to even 15 minutes, this helps the system operator to give signal to the other generators to ramp up their generation, which obviously respond to those signals. They ramp up their generation, bringing the frequency from point C to a position of their final settlement, that is the nominal value of the frequency at this point. The frequency response being provided by the system, as we see in this graph, is categorized into three time domains. One is the primary frequency response, which is the inherent response of the system, the secondary frequency response, and the tertiary frequency response as well. We'll discuss this in slightly detail. Here in this point is the pre-disturbance frequency, point B is the maximum expression frequency, that is the frequency nadir, and point C is the settling frequency of the interconnected point, after which the governors, they start acting and they try to bring this operating point to the nominal frequency point. At later stages, tertiary responses can also happen. They can also act to bring the system to its nominal position, perfectly to its nominal position. What frequency response constraint means, what it means is the value. What does that value mean? The frequency response characteristics of the frequency response capability of the system is reflected by the ratio of megawatt of generation lost to the change in frequency nodes. This gives us an understanding of how much generation is lost during that period. I'll just take a very quick break of a minute and I'll come.
Hello, sir.
Yeah. So these are the three domains of frequency responses that are being provided by the grid. We'll see how this impact. The inertial response that comes prior to the primary frequency response. The initial response works in the time frame of 0 to 5 seconds. It tries to maintain the power balance and helps to maintain the transient frequency dip. It tries to minimize that dip. That is the objective for the initial response. It works in a smaller time frame. The very initial responses that you get from the initial response, after which the primary frequency control starts acting. That operates in the time frame of 1 to 20 seconds. The aim is again to maintain the power balance and transient frequency recovery as soon as possible. And then the system's secondary control, that is automatic generation control, that starts to act. That starts to act in the time frame of 4 seconds, 3 minutes. Obviously, the automatic generation control mechanisms, they take some time, but they have got larger capacities and they help to maintain steady state frequency, the transient frequency. Then we also have the tertiary control of the system, which is provided in the time frame of 5 to 15 minutes, generally in the which is through economic load dispatch decisions that we do. Slightly understanding this, the three actions that happen in the grid. First section is the primary frequency control, which happens during the smaller time frame of 1 to 20 seconds. So we have got the generator, we have got the turbine, governor. So the moment there is a problem, this action helps to put in more power into the grid, more power, it pushes the generator to produce more. If this is not able to handle the situation, then we go in for the second level of frequency control, which is automatically generation control, where the inputs are the frequency, the nominal frequency, the power available, scheduled power, the tie lines, and the power lines. Is using the automatic generation control, it provides input to the generator to ramp up or ramp down the station. Even if this is not able to handle the generation imbalances, that would be taken over by the tertiary frequency control mechanisms by the system operator or the generation company, working in the time frame of 5 to 30 minutes, which is through scheduling decisions, that is optimal load flow, economic load flow, optimal power flow, dispatch decisions. This is a broader schematic of the reserves, balancing, and frequency management in this country. It is
Hello, sir. Rohit, sir.
Ma'am, you can call, sir, I think. Ma'am,
Yeah, yeah.
it's not audible.
Yeah, just wait for few minutes. Sir will be rejoining again.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, there was some network issue. Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah, sir will be joining in a few minutes. He got some network issue over there.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Is there an echo happening?
Sir, you are audible, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, madam.
Yes, sir. Your PPT is visible, sir, now.
Okay. Actually, there was sudden power failure.
Yes, sir.
There was a power failure at my.
Yeah, no issue.
Yeah. I'll continue with the same point.
Yeah, you can continue, sir.
So, yeah, this is the issue of equality. Hello.
Sir, your voice is very low, sir.
Yeah, is it now clear?
Yeah, okay, sir.
Yeah. If you can mute at your, actually, I'm facing a lot of echo. I'm not sure whether it is from my side or yours. Okay.
Now is it was fine, sir.
I think there is a small issue. Just let me try to solve it. Seems like have I joined in multiple entries?
Okay, sir. Just fix it.
You can remove one of those. Yeah. Yeah. So see from this graph that the situation. I hope I'm audible, ma'am. Now it is comfortable.
Yeah, but little volume is low, sir. Otherwise, it is fine, sir.
No, my volume is okay.
Okay. Is the volume okay now?
Yeah, now
Yes,
it is
sir,
fine,
yes,
sir.
sir. Yes.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption. There was a bit of power failure at my end. So if you see this whole picture, this is quite complex to see, and practically also it is quite complex to handle this situation from a system operator's perspective. And this, you can see the level of responses starting from the inertial response, followed by the primary frequency response, secondary frequency response, fast tertiary, slow tertiaries, generation rescheduling, that is the making new economic load dispatch decisions, and day ahead scheduling. All these things are involved over a period of time. Each response mechanism, each mechanism to handle the system demand supply balance has got different levels of response time as well as different level of energy available in them. Some of those response mechanisms, they have got significant energy available, can help them to provide responses for a larger time period. Whereas some of the responses like inertial responses, they are only available for few seconds. So depending upon which response is acting in what time frame the system is operating. Different type of responses would be acting. And these, if you do not have appropriate response mechanism, if you do not have appropriate frequency response management mechanisms, the capability of the system to handle larger RE penetration, that is restricted. There's a wide variety of research involved in this and wide variety of understanding that is required. I won't be going into the detail, but definitely it is an area that is significantly evolving in the Indian power sector. We have had a draft ancillary services regulation from Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, which is focusing upon few of those issues. And you can see that report in 2018, which is an important resource in this segment, which gives guideline on what level of RE penetration can be handled, what is the level of frequency response and inertial support that is required in the system, such that system remains reliable, system remains flexible at all points of time. And there are many things that need to be considered. What are the time frames? What is the quantum of energy available in each response? Who handles that? Is it to be handled at the local level or the national level? Is the response automatic or manual? Is it a decentralized response coming from different generators, or is it a centralized response coming from a centralized agency? What are the regulations? What are the grid codes? And how do you acquire them? Whether it is these responses are paid for, or those are the generators are regulated, they are mandated to provide that response. Whether we have a market for them or not, and what exactly is the implementation status of all those systems. These all are issues of understanding in this complex issue of ancillary services and maintaining primary frequency responses and load following regulation. Not going into the depth, but yes, these are issues where a lot of research is required, especially in the case of inertial primary and secondary frequency response, especially in the case of inertial and primary frequency response. These are areas where the generators are, the system operators facing a lot of problems. So when we are going in for high RE penetration, the challenges that we see increase in intermittency, increase in uncertainty from RE generation, leading to higher rate of change of frequency. So if you do not have adequate support, adequate generators connected to the system, which can provide inertial support, the frequency variation, the nadir that you have seen in one of the earlier graphs, the nadir that is reached, that would be lower nadir, and the rate at which the frequency changes would be significantly high. If the rate of change of frequency in the system is too high, the rate of change of frequency relays, we call them as Rokoff relays, which are connected into the grid, they get actuated, leading to a situation in which those relays would get activated, leading to isolation of those generators. So that would further aggravate the situation, can lead to blackouts. So we need to guard against any situation in which the rate of change of frequency changes at a very fast pace. Similarly, the issue of declining share, what in general the problem that we see is that because of the declining share of conventional sources, the inertia primary frequency response support that goes down, the capability of the system to respond and bring back the system to its normal situation, normal operating condition, that is lost. And if that is lost, after a few seconds, the system will go into, that generator will fail, or the generator has to be taken out of the system. That eventually would lead to more stresses in system operation. So these are some of the issues which restrict the capability of the system operator to integrate more and more renewables into the system. These impact the system security, these impact the reliability of the system, because more and more generators would go into outage if that the relays starts getting actuated. So we need better governor control in the conventional generators. So the governor mechanisms, they have been overhauled over all these years. More investment is required in the governing mechanism of these generators. Still, there is scope for improvement in refurbishing those generators. A lot of Those generators are yet to be improved upon. Inertia, we all understand that is provided by the kinetic energy of the rotating masses. That is scarce, and it would become more and more scarce if we do not provide appropriate level of inertia. So there are regulations that have been come up from the Regulatory Commission. 10,000 megawatt per hertz of inertia is mandatory to be maintained in the system at every point of time, and 4,000 megawatt of primary frequency response is mandated to be managed. That is, this is the level of reserve, primary frequency reserve or primary frequency response is to be maintained at any point of time in the grid. This is a learning that has come from the 2012 blackout that happened. Because of that, the system operator was under a stress to improve upon the system operating conditions, which has led to this regulation. After which we have not faced any major blackout in this country over the last 8-9 years. In case you do not have it, we'll be facing a lot of frequency excursion events. Under frequency load shedding would be happening, cascaded events, blackouts, which luckily we are not facing, despite the significant RE penetration has happened over all these years. Still, we are going on for a stronger and a stronger grid. Some of the other solutions that we see and that are being explored are in terms of putting up more energy storage. So when you're not able to get the required energy from those power plants, other options are putting up energy storage devices like pumped hydropower plants, flywheels, compressed air energy storage, battery energy storage systems. Or you could also operate these RE power plants in a derated state. That is, if it is a 100 megawatt power plant, you operate it at 80 megawatt so that whatever intermittencies happen, you mitigate or you subsume those intermittencies in the power plant itself. So even if the generation level is 90 megawatt, you are still operating it at 80 megawatt. If it is 85, still you are operating it at 80. Even if it goes to 100 megawatt, you are still operating it at 80. Because so that whatever variation is happening in the range of 80 to 100 megawatt, since you are operating the plant at 80 megawatt, those intermittencies can be mitigated. However, it leads to loss of generation. So that is the pitfall of operating these power plants at a derated. On the demand side also, there's a lot of discussion on bringing in demand side responses for the grid in terms of bringing in electric vehicle responses. We have been talking about aggregating the responses from electric vehicles, about bringing in demand responses like interruptible load, shiftable load, and rooftop solar. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yeah, there was some background noise, so there is no question. Fine. This is that was the second issue that we've discussed. We'll be touching upon, I think, given the time permits, we'll be touching upon one important feature that the system operator is quite concerned about. And we have been interacting with the POSOCO people for quite some time, and even highlighting what research we have done, and they are also interested in the research that we are doing and understanding the level of flexibility. Most of us would not have explored the issue of flexibility. There are very few research going on at present in the academia. But from an industry perspective, flexibility is becoming a big problem, and there are issues that need to be understood before we can do that. So this is quite interesting area of research for system operators industry practices also. What is happening is, because of this variability in the system, because of this uncertainty in the system, earlier what was happening was that we used to have, let's say, the whole of the generation coming from power plants, and the demand was what was uncertain. When the demand was uncertain, the whole of the generation was increased or decreased to mitigate whatever was the variation happening in the demand. So whatever variation was happening in the demand, we could fulfill that variation with the help of controlling the generators. So if there was an increase in the demand, we would suddenly increase the generation level. However, now with a lot of renewable penetration happening into the system, there is a certain portion of the generation in itself which is not controllable. That portion is the power energy that is coming from the renewable generation. So since it is not controllable, the portion of the generation available to us, which is controllable, is only about 70%. So now 100% of the load is uncertain, and even 30% of the generation is also uncertain, leaving us with only 70% of the generation that is controllable. And we need to use this 70% generation from the conventional generators to mitigate the uncertainties arising from the uncertainties of the load, as well as the uncertainties arising on the RE generation part. So when you see the significant level of uncertainties, not only on the demand side, but on the generation side as well, the rest of the generators, rest of the conventional generators, they are stressed. They are stressed because now they need to operate. There is less percentage. They are only 70% of the generation. They are required to be operated in such a way that they can mitigate the uncertainties of the load as well as the uncertainties of the RE generation. So they have to, these power plants, the conventional power plants, have to ramp up and ramp down at a very fast pace to fulfill what we call as the net load requirement. When we say the net load requirement, we mean that we quantify it as the difference between the total demand minus the RE generation of the system. So if the total demand of the system is 200 gigawatts, RE generation is 50 gigawatts, 150 gigawatt is the generation coming from conventional generators. So now we call 150 gigawatt as the net load of the system. The total load is 200 gigawatt, 50 gigawatt is the RE generation, and the net load remaining behind us, which is controllable, is 200 minus 50, that is 150. Now, in your hand, you only have 150 gigawatt to handle this variability and uncertainty. How this impacts the system is, if you see this graph on the right-hand side, this is a graph which represents the net load variability of the system. How is it becoming severe? I'll just explain you with this graph. There are 4 plots in this. One is a purple plot indicating the overall load in the system, the total load in the system, which increases in the morning, remains more or less stable. There are certain uncertainties, ramps up in the morning, in the evening, then suddenly ramps down in late night. Then we have a plot of wind generation, which is all the time the blue dotted line, which at all points of time is uncertain, which is more uncertain than you see in this graph, obviously. And the third graph is the maroon colored small dotted line plot, which increases in the morning, ramps up at a very fast pace, remains stable during the day, goes down in the evening, and then during the night time it is. So the net load in the system, that is the difference between the total load indicated by the purple line and the sum of the wind generation and the RE generation, with the wind generation indicated by the blue line and the solar generation indicated by the maroon line, gives us a value what we call as the net load of the system indicated by the black. This black bold line is what we call as the net load, which is the difference between the overall load in the system and the RE generation, that is the sum of wind and solar generation. What happens with this net load is, we'll take up 2 examples. During the morning hours, the load is increasing. The solar generation also increases, but it increases slightly late. Load starts increasing prior to that, because of which the net load also ramps up. After a few hours, it is somewhere around 7 o'clock, when the solar generation ramps up at a very fast pace. The demand does not increase at the same pace. because of which the net load requirement from the conventional generators, that goes down. So from 5 to 6 o'clock in the morning, it was ramping up. They had to ramp up. And from 6 to 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, they have to ramp down because now the solar generation is coming. It keeps in a lower state during the day, and in the afternoon, after 4 o'clock, when the solar suddenly starts going down because of sunlight, less sunlight, and the load, the overall load increasing, the net load in the system ramps up at a very fast pace. This ramping up is the problem that is there in the system, that is evolving in the system. And soon afterwards, as the load goes down, this net load also goes down. So instead of having a load which was more or less stable and there was only one ramp in the morning and one ramp in the evening, now we are facing more steeper ramps during the morning hours and the evening hours, and two significant ramps both in the morning and the evening hours. This leads to a situation in which the conventional power plants have to be ramped up at a very fast pace from T6 to T16 to T19 hours, and they are facing very sharp peaks between T67 and T19, T20. It is not that the generators do not have the capacity. The generators have the capacity to provide power, but unfortunately, they do not have the capacity to provide ramps into the system. They cannot ramp up, they cannot speed up that fast. That is the problem in the system. And that is the problem of this insufficient ramping capability, and is a major source of inflexibility. That means the system is not flexible enough to handle the variation in the system load. Because of this, despite that the system has got generation capability, well, it is not able to fulfill the ramping requirement of the system, thereby leading to shortages of energy being supplied to the system, and we have load shedding. So the system with adequate generation capacity, they cannot meet the demand, may be unable to meet the demand, or may be unable to match the net load changes due to ramping insufficiency, or maybe due to minimum up and down time constraints. This is one of the major sources of inflexibility in the system, which requires higher system support in terms of system flexibility. What we need to do is, or how we define it, is the extent to which a power system can modify electricity consumption. This is a basic definition that we talk about flexibility. There are two facets to it. One is the short-term operational flexibility. That is the generators, they do not have the ramping capability in the optimal power flow framework, minutes to hours framework. Scheduling is, we are not able to schedule those resources. We have those resources, but we are not able to schedule those resources because they cannot ramp up that fast. And second is the operational, second is the long-term flexibility planning problem, in which we don't have the resources. The capacity is not there. Those type of generators do not exist in the system. So we need to put up those, we need to install those power plants which can provide that ramping facility. So typically when we say we need to put up those power plants, we talk about gas power plants which can ramp up faster. We talk about pumped hydro, we talk about hydro power plants which can start up at a very fast pace. Coal power plants that typically require larger time. So they have limited ramping capability. Some of the indices that we have been working upon in this segment over the last few years is, like in terms of assessing flexibility, is the power capacity limit, ramping limit, energy capacity limit, as well as the response time of providing that. Some of the measures of inflexibility, I would say, are the quantum of renewable curtailment that we have to do in case appropriate ramping capability is not there, or load curtailment we have to go in for, or ramping insufficiency. These are some of the measures of inflexibility of the system. What are the options to handle these issues? Just touching upon those. Some of those options that you see in this figure are improved operation. Improved operation means improving the time frame in which you are doing the scheduling. Maybe rather than doing the scheduling economic load dispatch for an hour, you're going for 15-minute scheduling, or you're going for 5-minute scheduling. Securing more demand response from the system, or making investment into the transmission grid infrastructure, or getting more generation side flexibility, or putting in more energy storage systems, or going in for sector coupling, that is integrating electricity with heat or electricity with the gas sectors. Coupling those sectors can provide those flexibility. These are some of the wider research domains that we're exploring. And we see a potential, lot of potential in these several years. So energy storage is one important solution that can be explored. This is costly, but yes, they provide very fast responses because they have that capability, especially the battery storage. They have responses that are very fast. So available technologies that people are exploring: pumped hydro, flywheel storage, compressed air storage, flow battery, solid state. All of them are being explored at different applications. Another is sector coupling, in which we talk about vehicle to grid, grid to vehicle, combined heat and power plants, hydrogen storage, another sector, coordinating gas and electricity grids, coordinating heat and electricity grids. These are some of the options that we explore when we talk about sector coupling. When we talk about operation, we mean reducing the scheduling time frame from 1 hour to 15 minutes, or from 15 minutes to 5-minute interval, so that we can monitor and handle the system at a faster frequency, faster rates. Then going in for better demand and RE forecast is one of the options. Creating improved operation in terms of going in for stochastic reserve scheduling instead of normal scheduling that we do. Going in for providing market products like flexible ramp products, which can provide that flexibility in the system in terms of providing ramping. Shorter gate closure. Now we have a gate closure 4 hours ahead of the delivery time. That is, the markets close 4 hours ahead of the delivery. If we have to deliver the power at 12 o'clock in the noon, the markets will close at 8 o'clock in the morning. We can reduce that time and handle that uncertainty. This is one of the ways. There's a lot of research into it. This is not a very light slide, I would say, but it requires a lot of, it would require an hour to explain each one of them. I'm just touching upon what are the flexibility options that people are exploring as of now. Demand response, which is one of the least cost options, in which the customers can reduce or increase their demand, shift their demand, that is their load, provided they are given some economic signal, provided they are given some benefit. That can help to reduce the peak demand in the system, reduce the ramping requirement in the system. However, the problem is that you need to install smart meters, you need to control the load in households, which obviously has got investment is required in terms of automatic management of that system. Also, cybersecurity issues will always be there when you're controlling it from a remote place. Grid infrastructure will mean making investment into the grid. Generation side flexibility means putting up those power plants which have got better ramping facilities, like gas power plants, or power plants which have got lower startup and shutdown times, like the hydropower plants. These are some of the options that I think we can explore. I think in the interest of time, I'm not, if the organizers permit, I'll stop at this point, and I'll be happy to take up, because I have a lot more things that I can discuss possibly at some other point in time in future when we're discussing those. But these are the three key issues that I have discussed. One is this of flexibility that we have just talked about. One is about the inertial and primary frequency response challenges in the system. And the first one was about system planning, how to integrate the short-term intermittencies in long-term system planning. these are the three things possibly that I think should be sufficient for understanding some of the challenges that we are facing handling the grid as of now. I'll be happy to take questions on any of these things rather than going ahead with more stuff. Please, anybody.
Any questions from the participants?
If any question is there, kindly unmute and you can ask. Or you can put it in chat also.
I'll be happy to take questions. I think these are emerging challenges, and we are one of the research groups which are significantly focusing on these challenges, which even industry is able to, the planners, the policymakers, they are able to appreciate. And a lot of funding is available in these segments, all these three segments that we talked about, and more possibly which could have got. In the area of system planning, Central Electricity Authority, the NITI Aayog, they are quite keen to understand what is the level of energy storage that we would require, what is the level of RE penetration that we can handle in the system. These are some of the issues that people are at the national level they are talking about. Startup disruption. Yes, this would have been one of the topics that I would have discussed at time. Startup disruption. I think with the new Electricity Act coming in, that is there in the Parliament as of now, they would open up a total new business area on the retail side, in which there would be a large number of retailers. And one of the biggest innovation that can happen in the power sector would happen on the distribution side, in terms of what are the services that the retailer would be able to provide. Presently, you see the distribution companies only providing you electricity. It has a meter. It provides you the facility of reading the meters, the meter reading. It provides you reliable power, but nothing beyond it. There are a lot of opportunities in this sector by providing more reliable power, by providing green power, by providing cheaper power during different times of the day. So that is the area where innovation would happen. And that is the area where even small companies can do business. I've seen those companies in other countries coming up. They have made money. They have grown up. Same is the situation. Provided this act comes into being. That those innovations would happen on the distribution side. A lot of those innovations would happen on the distribution side as such. Apart from that, the other challenge, if there are other questions, I'll be happy to take up if they are coming up. Otherwise, I'll just brief up the other challenge of frequency response and inertial response. That also, because the system operator is quite regularly facing this issue of maintaining frequency in the system. And the traditional generators, they are not able to ramp up that fast. So at all points of time, and if you remember the incident of the light out event that happened in April 2020, in which the Prime Minister had encouraged people to switch off their lights and switch on after 9 minutes. That led to a significant ramp up and ramp down and ramp up in the system. That was one of the biggest ramping event in the world, about 32 gigawatt in few minutes. So even we are strong enough a grid that we were able to handle that much of ramp. And that much of ramp significantly came from hydropower plants. So that type of events or that type of challenges are likely to happen when renewables get penetrated into the system. So these ramping studies, these studies on primary frequency control and inertial responses, they become important in those situations where high ramping requirements are there. And the third one about flexibility, obviously because we are going into a market segment where people are operating for their own profit. So the margins that are left within the system, the margins to benefit, the margins at which they would be operating, the margins are too low. So if a generator has to supply 80 gigawatt, it would, if it has got a capacity of 100 gigawatt, it would try to operate it at as close as possible to 100 gigawatt, leaving very less margin for going up and down, increasing the generation. So in those situations, the flexibility available in the system would go down. So the system operator is becoming more and more concerned that even in those situations, if there are sudden problems in the RE generation, which are likely to happen, then how to handle those situations? Those come under the domain of flexibility. If there are any verbal questions, I'll be happy to
Any
take.
further questions? I think no questions, sir. We'll wind up. Thank you very much, Rohit, sir. As we all know, the renewable energy is gaining more and more importance. These sessions give the basics to the renewables, and here has told that what is the status of renewable energy in India. Then he has given a brief session on lifting on the Indian power sector. What are things going on in Indian power sector? What is the function of state? What is the function of central? Various policies there. And finally, he has told the challenges we are facing when you have more and more renewable energy sources connected into the grid. And sir has explained the frequency response characteristics when generator is having when the system is having a generator outage. And sir has given the transition or the details on transition towards low carbon power systems. So thank you, sir. Thank you for spending your valuable time with us. Thank you very much. Hope that this session gave a lot of information to the participants and they can use this information for their research work. Thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.